Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are wrestling with a really complex and frankly pretty explosive sentiment.
It's something that's driving major policy shifts right now, not just in one country, but across the Western world and even in parts of the Gulf and Asia.
Yeah, and the statement we pulled from our source material, this highly charged global online discussion, it just hits so hard. The quote is, "The world doesn't want us anymore."
That phrase, it really captures the anxiety of the moment. It reflects this dramatic and really rapid shift in global perception.
And just to be clear about our sources here, this isn't coming from like official government reports.
No, not at all. What we have is a collection of real-time anxieties, its frustrations, and often some pretty scathing criticisms aimed at the Indian diaspora and, I guess, the immigration policies that allowed for such a quick influx.
We're talking countries like the US, Canada, Australia, Ireland, even the UAE.
It's a widespread phenomenon.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to really move past the rhetoric, past the politics, and get into the specifics.
The specific incidents, you mean?
Exactly. The incidents, the systemic failures, the cultural friction points that the sources are citing over and over again as the fuel for this backlash. We need to understand the mechanism here.
Absolutely. And to get at that sentiment, I think we have to start where a lot of the emotional damage began, with these specific high-profile accidents that really acted as tipping points.
You mean places where local frustration just boiled over?
That's it, exactly.
The sources take us right to this one tragic incident in the U.S. They've dubbed it the Florida trucking tragedy.
Right.
And we're talking about an individual driver who was, well, reportedly undocumented. He apparently lacked functional English.
But somehow he had a commercial driver's license, a CDL.
An illegal CDL. He makes an illegal U-turn on a major U.S. highway, and it kills 3 people.
And what really stands out in the source material, what seems to have deeply affected the local community, was the reaction right after the crash.
His reaction, you mean?
His reaction. Witnesses described this perceived lack of remorse. He said he had an A attitude, that he just didn't give a damn moments after causing 3 deaths.
And the critics in the discussion, they immediately jumped on that.
They did. They linked that perceived indifference to, a desensitization that they claim comes from crowded, low-regulation environments back in his home country.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because it points to a much bigger systemic failure. The question the sources all ask is, how?
How does an undocumented person who clearly doesn't meet the language or legal requirements get a CDL in the first place?
Especially with all the stringent checks in place.
Exactly. And this is where that feeling of betrayal comes in. The sources suggest the answer is systematic fraud.
Fraud enabled by who?
By internal networks, often facilitated by people from within the immigrant's own community. They talk about this whole shadow economy of consultancies.
What do they do?
They provide fake residency documents, they arrange for people to cheat on tests, or they even just, find ways to bypass the system entirely to get a license issued.
So it wasn't just one person exploiting a loophole.
No, it's the allegation of an organized corruption, a network promising a shortcut. And in this case, that corruption led directly to death. That's a huge insight.
It is, and the public reaction after the tragedy was seen as, just as damaging to the diaspora's reputation.
The huge part of the community, especially on social media, they immediately started defending the driver.
Defending him?
By calling the fatal U-turn an unintentional small mistake. Some even suggested it's not a big deal in India. And they actually organized protests demanding leniency for him.
And there was a petition, right?
A massive one. A petition to commute his sentence or stop his deportation. It got over 2.5 million signatures.
And the sources say those signatures were almost exclusively from one group.
Yes, effectively demanding special treatment, even after the U.S. legal system had already run its course.
That kind of request, where it seems like community loyalty is put above the host country's laws, that was just seen as inexcusable by critics.
And it wasn't a one-off thing. The sources immediately connected to that infamous Canadian case.
The Humboldt Broncos crash.
Right. Another Indian truck driver.
Yeah.
A crash that killed 16 people, and he also fought deportation afterwards.
And that case in Canada, it brings up an even deeper issue with judicial policy, doesn't it?
It does. The critics in our sources point to a Canadian Supreme Court ruling, one that suggested judges have to take immigration status into account during sentencing.
What does that even mean in practice?
Well, the critics call it absolutely wild. means a judge might give a lighter sentence, say, a misdemeanor instead of a felony, specifically to stop someone from getting deported.
Or to make sure they can still sponsor their family later on.
Exactly. And that idea that protecting someone's immigration path could override the actual punishment for a crime, that's seen as a profound failure of the justice system.
So if these tragedies are the symptoms, then the underlying disease has to be this combination of, I guess, sheer scale and systemic fraud.
That's a good way to put it. We have to move from the individual stories to the overwhelming numbers. The scale is a huge factor here.
India is the most populous nation on Earth.
And that has led to this influx into Western nations that is just described as too many too quickly.
You see it in the visa stats.
Oh, absolutely. Indian nationals reportedly make up, 80% or more of the U.S. H-1B visas?
Yeah.
They're massively overrepresented in foreign worker populations everywhere.
But the real issue isn't just the numbers, right? It's the alleged abuse of the systems that are supposed to manage those numbers.
That's the core of it.
Okay, so let's define some terms here for anyone listening. When we talk about these U.S. work visas, H-1B and L-1, what are we talking about? And who are these DESI consultancies?
Sure. So H-1B is a temporary visa for high-skilled jobs, like engineers. L-1 is for moving employees within a multinational company. DESI is just a term for people from the Indian subcontinent. So DESI consultancies are these firms, often run by Indian Americans, that critics allege have just completely gamed the system.
And how do they game it? The source material says they destroyed the H-1B system by bullshitting qualifications?
Well, the sources allege it's a pretty sophisticated fraud. The H-1B was meant to fill these really niche jobs Americans couldn't do.
But instead,
the consultancies created this body shopping model. They allegedly create fake resumes. They coach people for interviews. They give them fraudulent experience letters.
yeah.
They'll even list candidates as working for ghost jobs to meet the visa requirements. So it became a way to just replace mid-level American jobs with cheaper contract workers.
You can imagine the resentment that creates, especially in tech. I mean, if you're a new comp sci grad in the U.S. right now, seeing this must be incredibly frustrating.
It is. The sources say the resentment in the tech community is profound, especially with new grad unemployment so high. They feel the system was weaponized to drive down their wages.
And this isn't just for entry-level jobs.
No, not at all. Sources also mention jaw-dropping amounts of fraud and patently bullshit papers being used to game even the highest skilled applications.
You're talking about the EB-1A and B visas, the ones for extraordinary ability.
The very same. Green card categories for top professors and researchers. The alleged mechanism is the same. Fraudulent documents to bypass requirements, whether it's for a truck license or a genius grant.
And meanwhile, up in Canada, the focus of the alleged fraud seems to shift from high-skilled work to student visas.
That's where the numbers just become overwhelming. The sources describe this widespread fraud where people come to Canada on a study permit.
But they're not really there to study.
They've lied about having the funds to pay tuition and live.
Yeah.
They get there and then they just work, often in low-skilled jobs. The study permit is just a cheap backdoor work visa.
And what happens when that visa expires?
Well, then they claim asylum. Or they organize these huge public protests demanding to be given permanent status.
Arguing that they've already put down roots in Canada.
Exactly. Critics call it one massive fraud leading to another. The government feels pressured to basically reward the fraud to avoid a humanitarian crisis.
And this has led to some really damning claims about the economic impact of all this, particularly in Canada.
The central claim from critics is that this historic influx was mostly low-skilled.
And that it did absolutely zero benefit for the Canadian economy.
And crucially, that it led to stagnated or even decreased GDP per capita, which means, the average Canadian isn't getting any richer, even though the population is growing.
That's a powerful indictment of the host country's policy. Do the sources say how these so-called oligopolies influence the government?
The claim, and it's repeated a lot, is that it wasn't an accident. It was a gift to the oligopolies.
Meaning big corporations.
Exactly. Logistics companies, fast food chains, real estate developers, companies that need a huge supply of low-wage labor to keep their costs down.
So by flooding the market with disposable workers, the government was helping these corporations keep wages down.
That's the argument, that they serve the corporations instead of focusing on high-value industries like biotech or advanced manufacturing.
Which frames this not just as an immigration problem, but as a deliberate economic choice by Canada itself.
It does.
Okay, let's pivot now. Because beyond the law and the economics, there's this intense cultural friction that's also driving the backlash.
Right. This is about social behavior and the barriers to integration. And the most consistent criticism across all the sources is that large parts of the diaspora are just not integrating.
Not adopting Western culture in the same way as other groups have,
And a big structural reason for that is the formation of these massive enclaves.
where you can live your entire life without needing to speak English or adopt local customs.
You don't have to. And that has this powerful feedback loop, especially in the economy.
How so?
The sources allege that when people from these enclaves get into hiring positions, they often only hire other Indians.
Creating what critics are calling internal discrimination.
Yes, and that just continues the cycle. It reduces opportunities for locals and for other immigrant groups, too.
And this goes beyond just hiring. It gets into basic public conduct, what one source called a lack of civic sense.
This is where the anecdotes get very specific and, pretty difficult to hear, but they're central to the frustration.
What kind of things are we talking about?
The sources repeatedly cite issues with public hygiene, specific reports of dirty diapers and even feces being left in Canadian truck stop showers.
Wow.
Pervasive littering, spitting on buses, just a general failure to clean up after themselves in public spaces. These behaviors, whether they're, widespread or exaggerated, are cited as evidence of a deep cultural difference,
It sounds like a clash between what's seen as a high-trust society
where you assume everyone will respect shared spaces.
and behavior that's perceived as being imported from a low-trust environment.
Precisely. And it extends into the professional world, too. Criticisms of Indian male colleagues being disrespectful to female colleagues, especially women who outrank them.
Behavior rooted in more traditional hierarchical structures.
Right. And that low trust dynamic also shows up in this really striking anecdote about a university food voucher program.
Tell me about that.
So there's this program to help vulnerable students get food. It was apparently gutted after an employee used these low trust strategies, basically prioritizing their own group over the rules, to refer almost entirely Indian students who weren't properly vetted.
So the program was exploited.
It was exploited, and then it had to be shut down, which hurt all the students who actually needed it. It creates this perception that a few people are willing to ruin a shared resource to get an advantage for their group.
And that just erodes social cohesion.
Profoundly.
Finally, there's the political and social angle to this culture clash, which is also really charged.
This is a major tension point. Critics point out what they see as hypocrisy.
In what way?
They note a trend as some immigrant groups, including some Indians and Muslims, rallying against LGBTQ rights or aligning with far-right groups in their new countries.
And the contradiction there is?
The contradiction, as the sources point out, is that these same groups benefited directly from the host country's civil rights movements. Those movements are what allowed them to immigrate and succeed in the first place.
But now they're aligning with movements trying to take away rights from other groups.
Exactly. And the critics are basically saying, if you don't believe in the foundational principle of equal rights for everyone here, then that is a fundamental barrier to integration.
Okay. So to synthesize all this, we have to look at the broader context, right? The push and pull factors that created this whole situation. It can't all be on the individuals.
Not at all. On the push side, you have to acknowledge the desperation. The sources say the motivation to leave India is often because it's seen as a very bad place for living.
A system rigged against you.
Rigged by corruption, by bureaucracy. The pressure to leave is so intense that even top officials apparently send their own families abroad. And many feel this brain drain is just making things worse back home.
And then there's the pull factor.
The pull factor is the counter-argument, that the Western countries are not innocent here. Critics argue it's unfair to blame immigrants when the host countries have this insatiable demand for low-wage workers.
That they use immigration as a, quote, weapon to drive down the cost of labor.
That Canadian example is key. If countries paid their own citizens a proper wage, the incentive to import massive numbers of cheap workers would just shrink.
And it is absolutely crucial that we say the source material shows this isn't a monolith. The anger is targeted. It's not a blanket opinion against everyone.
Precisely. Many high-skilled professionals, doctors, PhDs, ethical engineers, they contribute hugely and they integrate seamlessly.
There's still areas like the Bay Area with overwhelmingly positive views of highly educated Indian immigrants.
Right. And in some Spanish-speaking areas, Indians have assimilated really well into working-class roles. So it's very dependent on the local context.
So when we put all the pieces together, what does it all mean?
The synthesis is pretty clear. You have a massive, rapid surge in immigration from one country.
Colliding head-on with these very serious allegations of systemic fraud, a pattern of low-trust behavior, and a perceived lack of cultural assimilation.
And that perfect storm is fueling a dramatic, undeniable public backlash. It's forcing governments, Canada, Ireland, the U.S., to slam on the brakes, tighten the doors, and rethink their entire model.
Which leaves us with our final provocative thought, and it comes directly from the conflicts we found in the sources.
The debate really centers on what the root cause is. Is it cultural ethics? Is it just sheer numbers? Or is it the economic model of the host countries themselves?
Right. And if Western countries continue to prioritize an economic model that demands low-cost, disposable labor above all else, will they inherently only attract the most opportunistically driven immigrants?
Immigrants who prioritize, getting ahead by any means necessary, regardless of the cultural or legal cost of the society they're joining? And if that's the case, what is the true long-term cost of that kind of low-wage economic growth?